Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's School Building Committee Forum about the proposed new middle school. My name is Mark Breen. I'm a member of the school committee, and I'm a member of the school building committee as well. So we have a lengthy presentation, and we'll have a question and answer session as well. And I would ask that at the question and answer time, if you could come up and use this center podium here and take turns asking questions there if you could. So the particular purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide our RTMs and any members of the public information about the proposed new middle school, pictured up here. Built in the 1960s, both Burton and Johnson middle schools are near the end of their functional life with physical and system deficiencies. The facilities no longer support the adequate space and delivery of education programming to the students of Walpole. The buildings are not fully compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and much of their existing plumbing and HVAC systems are original and near the end of their useful life, with overhauls of such systems either exorbitantly expensive or impossible. The presentation will include information about the design, the overall scope, timeline, budget, MSBA grant process, with anticipated reimbursement to Walpole, and the tax implications of the project. Again, there will also be time to ask questions. This is our 8th community forum, and we have striven to provide as much information as we can and address all questions as they've come forward prior to the October 23rd town meeting and the November 2nd town vote. Next slide.
Introduce everybody.
Oh, pardon me. We have a number of people here speaking. Mr. Frisha from the school administration, Mr. Hahn from the school administration, Mr. Barrett, Mr. Barrett, we don't meet very often, from the select board, Ms. Lawson from the finance committee, Dr. Goff, the superintendent of schools, Brian Jarvis from the owner's project managers company, Compass, and Jim Johnson, the town administrator. Thank you, Bridget. So the Massachusetts School Building Authority strives to work with local communities on cost-effective, sustainable, and energy-efficient schools across the state. The MSBA has a dedicated revenue stream of 1 penny on the state's 6.25% sales tax and collaborates with municipalities to equitably invest in finding the right-sized, most fiscally responsible, and educationally appropriate solutions to create safe, sound, and sustainable learning environments. By meeting all of the MSBA's requirements, Walpole is eligible to receive about $37 million in state funding, but again, the process is dictated by the MSBA. During the eligibility period, the MSBA requires the town to form a school building committee. The school building committee has to work with the MSBA to be compliant, to produce compliant plans for the project with the guidance of the owner's project manager. Ultimately, the MSBA has final approval of these plans. The school building committee is a diverse group. There's a list of the representatives up there. Town officials, school officials, community members, school committee members. Compass participates in the meeting. TAPE Architects participates in the meeting. Early on, we had New Vista Design that helped kind of capture people's imagination about the possibilities of the project. The committee, importantly, began its work in 2019, about a year and a half ago. Brought on Compass Project Management as the owner's project manager and has held over 25 meetings in the interim. The school building committee has. Pardon me. The overall process started 8 years ago in 2013 with the McGuire report commissioned by the town to provide a comprehensive master plan study to address the facility needs of the town, which included the middle schools. The report recommended combining the middle schools for a projected cost of about $58 million. 8 years later, the MSBA has come to a similar conclusion about the needs for a new combined middle school. In 2016, we had a secondary school space option study conducted by DRA Associates, and in March 2016, the Walpole Public Schools applied to the MSBA with our first statement of interest. It's a little bit different, involved middle schools and the high school, a lot of moving parts. That possibility was rejected twice. In 2018, after another statement of interest was submitted to the MSBA did invite the town of Walpole into the eligibility period, in which they recognized the needs at the middle school and approved a study for enrollments of both schools. There were 70 different projects submitted in that time frame. 12 were accepted, including our middle school project. So they have very limited funds, and they can only approve so many projects at a time to even begin the process. Walpole would not have been considered or invited unless the MSBA believed we needed to address our building deficiencies of the middle schools. As a result, in the same year, the town meeting appropriated $1.5 million for a feasibility study. The feasibility study agreement with the MSBA enabled the school building committee to explore potential design solutions that met the requirements of the district educational program to determine the most cost-effective and educationally appropriate solution for our aging middle schools. Next slide. In the first half of 2020, Walpole hired Compass Project Management to guide us through the process. We brought on TAP-A architects to design the facility. And we have worked, our Compass and the school building committee has worked with several town departments, including the fire department, the police department, and most recently the Council on Aging. Compass has significant experience working with the MSBA and completing school building projects on time and under budget. In November of 2020, all of the preliminary design plan was submitted to the MSBA for approval, and that language, PDP, schematic design and so forth, we will elaborate on. In February of 2021, the preferred schematic report was submitted to the MSBA, and in July of 2021, the schematic design was submitted. On August 25th, the MSBA approved our schematic design, the building that you saw, at their board meeting. Please note that we have had multiple community forums along the way, at least 8 since the fall of 2020, in addition to our 25 school building committee meetings. Next slide, please. So this is an elaboration on some of that language I just used, preliminary design and schematic design and so forth. The preliminary design program was submitted in October of 2020 and consisted of many submissions. Most importantly was the educational program. What do we do in the Walpole middle schools and what do we expect of our schools? There were space summaries. How well does the existing space fit our needs and what might be the deficiencies? There was an evaluation of the overall condition of the buildings and a review of up to 19 different various combinations and permutations as to what we could do. Additions and renovations or new buildings, again, when you add it up, it comes to a lot of different possibilities. We narrowed it down pretty quickly to, I believe, 6 options, pardon me, which we then further narrowed down to 3 options, including the one before you tonight. The preferred schematic report narrowed the final options, as I just mentioned, down to this bird site, based on any number of analyses, the educational program, the overall cost of the building schedule, this construction duration, the impact to the existing school, the impact to the fields, potential for adjustments to the program in the future. And again, this was reviewed by a subcommittee at the MSBA to see if we had our ducks in a row, so to speak, and they recommended that we move forward. In July of 2021, the schematic design report was submitted to the MSBA. Again, that building that we saw in the first slide, a variation on that. It considered energy codes, traffic considerations, environmental considerations, soil testing and so forth, ADA accessibility. Input was provided from the building department, the engineering department, the conservation people, the DPW, the police were involved, the fire were involved. All this was reconciled into a final building with cost estimates, total project budget, project schedule, and projected MSBA reimbursements.
Thank you, Mark.
Dr. Goff.
Thanks. So I think what Mark's trying to say is that this is a very comprehensive process. And if you look actually at the bottom of each of these columns, you can see the binders that have to be submitted. And we have copies in the superintendent's office, and then we also have the copies in the town administrator's office. And there's also schematic design sketches as well. So there really is a tremendous amount of work that the school building committee has to complete. One of the MSBA deliverables was to establish this comprehensive and thoughtful educational program. And what it does is it articulates the educational goals and the needs of our district. This plan must also provide future flexibility to adapt to the changes in our programming or teaching methodologies over the useful life of the schools. So the educational program, it's approximately 65 pages that we submit and write. But I'm going to highlight some of the key components that are up here in the next few slides, just to show how the combined middle school supports the vision and how it also meets our ed program. Teaming is really at the heart of our middle school philosophy. Really, the design of a combined middle school must promote an environment where our students, our staff, our families, and our community members can come together and build these collaborative partnerships. So what happened in 2020, both the school building committee and the school committee endorsed a combined middle school enrollment, which is educationally sound and significantly more cost effective than building separate projects. So why consolidate? And you can see the reasons up here. Walpole Middle School is committed to educating students in what we call an inclusive environment, where students have equitable access to resources and engaging opportunities to learn and thrive. So all students will benefit from this new combined middle school. Having all students in district programs in one building really enables greater flexibility with regard to the delivery of our student services and our student needs. It provides an expanded sense of community, and it really builds a stronger learning environment. Teaming is another reason. So in order for students to truly have a sense of belonging and connection and gaining that social, emotional, and academic benefits of being in a small learning community, we believe that they must be grouped in clearly defined and consistent teams, which a combined middle school program would allow us to create. Improve school programming and related arts offerings. A combined middle school will also allow us to utilize our staff to offer a more robust curriculum, and then after-school programs that can't run due to enrollment. And finally, a combined middle school is significantly more cost-effective than building separate buildings. So if they're separate, for example, it could be more than 8 years to finish a second project with MSBA funding. There's no guarantee that we will get back into this pipeline. Additionally, the MSBA will not participate in 2 projects simultaneously. As Mark noted, it was difficult enough to get into the pipeline for the first time. We had 70 statement of interests that were submitted, and as Mark mentioned, 12 were accepted, and only 3 were middle schools. And in October of 2019, we were one of 4 schools invited into the feasibility period. So just taking a look at some renderings. As you can see here, the combined middle school is 162,193 square feet with 45 classrooms and labs. So it's 5 per team, 3 teams per grade. So really having neighborhoods and a sense of community with a 905 enrollment. There's a separated car bus circulation loops, overflow and event parking, and a new entrance to East Street. The site plan also preserves access to green space in the fields, as it's important to maintain this green space in fields for all of our programs, both academically, athletically, and socially. Additionally, we do not have to incur the cost to recreate the fields or actually to build new fields. The schematic floor plan, if you look here, you can see that grade level neighborhoods were mentioned 79 times in our education plan. I think teaming was about 135 times. You can see this, and this came out of our visioning sessions. Since teaming is at the heart of our middle school philosophy, neighborhoods drive our core academic spaces. Each neighborhood will be organized by 3 grade level teams, 3 teams per grade, and support the school's team-based approach to curriculum delivery. This building really maximizes and enables greater flexibility with regard to the delivery of our special education services, which is an inherent part of each neighborhood and builds, like I mentioned, a stronger learning environment. Each neighborhood will contain 4 general education classrooms, a dedicated science classroom, what we call a STEAM, that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math space to facilitate what we call inquiry, presentation, project-based learning, and collaboration. Neighborhoods should have this feeling of home and that they're comfortable and safe, sending the message to students they are part of a small learning community which in turn is connected to the fabric of a larger school. The opportunities presented with this building will greatly enhance what we can offer in science, technology, and engineering, and enable a deeper level of research and design. Additionally, it will enable our current programs, such as robotics, news production teams, and music, to thrive. This building provides equitable access to 21st century learning environments and programming. 100% of our students benefit from new technology. Our technology literacy and computer science lab, our multimedia or video production lab. These labs bring what we call interactive and immersive experiences through virtual reality platforms. Team skills that apply as part of a team to address unique design challenges and create authentic solutions. Labs where students can learn about solar, energy conservation, hydroponics for our next generation of environmental or biological scientists. It also enables us to build our robotics program at the middle schools and our news production teams, really sending a nice feeder system to the high school. A dedicated auditorium was also stated in our education program that is educationally appropriate and came out of multiple visiting sessions and community forums. We have a large music program where every student takes a music, and one of these courses will actually take place on the stage, and behind the stage there'll be another music classroom. This also supports our drama program and other educational programs that occur throughout the day. There's also rental possibilities with community-based performing arts, and it allows for community meetings as well. The dining space as well as the kitchen will facilitate community outreach. It accommodates off-hour school and community education and partnerships. There's a central kitchen, cafeteria, that will be utilized. Also, what's important to note is vocational opportunities for our special education programming and our students. This space will support job training and hands-on learning for our special education students, and this partnership is an integral part of our inclusion program. Taking two gyms, Bird Gym, Johnson Gym, creating one larger gym, and there'll be one teaching station that will be shared with our special education programming, since adaptive phys ed, occupational therapy, and physical therapy can have a dedicated space to meet the needs and allow for integration with peers. The visioning sessions also expressed a strong desire to build a school that allows for community access. This school will provide performance venues, gathering spaces, athletic spaces that can be safely accessed by the community after school, on weekends, and during the summer months with the auditorium, the cafeteria, and the gym.
Thanks, Dr. Goff. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brian Jarvis. I'm project director with Compass Project Management. We're the owner's project manager for this project. An owner's project manager is required in all Massachusetts public construction over $1.5 million. So obviously this project qualifies for that requirement. We're hired by towns and communities to help them manage their projects from design through construction. Compass does strictly public management work. We've been working in public construction for the last 15 years. Most recently, I've been project manager on the Natick Kennedy Middle School. I was also project manager on the Norfolk County Agricultural High School project, as well as the project manager on the new Norwood High School in Norwood. I'm also a resident. I'm a taxpayer. My wife is a graduate of Walpole High School, and my boys both went to Bird Middle School. So hopefully I bring a hometown perspective to this project, as well as our experience from Compass. I'll talk a little bit about the details, technical details of the building, as well as the MSBA process, and then turn it over to some other speakers as we wrap up. From a sustainability, energy efficiency perspective, this building is going to be very energy efficient. It's targeting a LEED Silver, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. That deals with everything from energy efficiency of systems to reuse of recyclable materials, sustainable materials, how you handle the waste on a project, all the way through the efficiencies of fixtures in the building, access to public transportation, access to pedestrian ways, bikeways, et cetera. A lot goes into that. It's just not energy efficiency. However, the systems designed for this building will be 20% or more efficient than the Mass Energy Code. And by doing so, that qualifies for an additional 2% reimbursement from the MSBA, and we'll see how that factors into the calculation in a few minutes. We're also partnering with Eversource and Mass Save to explore some of the rebate and incentive programs. They offer rebates both during design, during construction, and then post-construction during occupancy as they see how well the building is actually running. A lot of those are one-time rebates that come back into the help fund the project. The building will be net zero energy ready, and what that means is that once a renewable energy source is made available to the building, that over the annual operation of the building will potentially be able to offset its energy use. So at the end of the day, at the end of the year, you will wash out your energy cost on the building. Right now, this project is setting up to provide the infrastructure to put photovoltaics or solar panels on the roof of the building and potentially on the site, similar to maybe a parking canopy that you see at the Aggie School. Once that renewable energy is introduced to the building, then depending on how the town or district procures the renewable energy, they'll start to offset the energy bills in addition to whatever savings they already realized through more efficient systems. Total project budget, I know a lot of you have seen this number that's out there, it's in the packets for town meeting, et cetera. Total project budget is $115.7 million. That's made up of several different major line items. So there's already 1.5 has been appropriated for feasibility and schematic, which is currently what the project is operating on. That funding gets us to this point. A yes vote or approval of the project will move the project into design. There'll be another agreement with the MSBA to move forward for this total project cost. Project management's included architect and engineering. Construction cost, the building is approximately $571 per square foot. When you times that by the size of the building, it comes out to about $92.6 million. In that cost is also cost of not only the construction itself, it includes a contingency for the contract construction manager at risk, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. It also includes an escalation factor. Obviously, we're not going to be going to construction if this project is approved until sometime late next year, so we're factoring that into the cost of this estimate. That was included in the estimate that was submitted to the MSBA. Roughly 7%, almost $5 million of escalation is factored into that cost. We also include other costs, miscellaneous project costs, such as utility fees, bringing new services into the building, testing services all throughout construction, moving, obviously we're going to have to move 2 schools to this building at some point, there'll be fees with that, a lot of different peripheral costs. It includes furniture and technology for the new building. It also includes contingencies, both an owner's construction contingency for change orders during construction, so things that would be paid to the contractor, as well as soft cost contingencies that'll help pay for if there's any additional costs or added scope in some of those other items that we talked about. Put those all together and it comes up to 115.7. So how does that project budget relate to the MSBA funding process? So what the MSBA does is they give you a reimbursement rate of eligible project costs, and we'll talk about eligible costs in a minute. The base rate to Walpole when they signed up for the feasibility and schematic phase was 48.6%. They basically look at all of the different demographics, how affluent a town is, the needs of a town. Each town gets a different rate. Walpole's comparable to some of the towns around here. Some towns are lower, and we'll see that in a few minutes. Some towns have a higher need, and you can probably figure out what towns fall into what categories. But Walpole's in a fairly good position at almost 50% base rate. You then have the opportunity to increase that rate with different incentives, and the 2 incentives that we will qualify for on this project are the energy efficiency incentive that we talked about, an additional 2%, plus based on the town's maintenance program for their district, basically how well they take care of the building, you can get up to another 2 points. We got an additional 1.5% for a total rate of 52.22%. So the MSBA is going to reimburse 52.2% of every eligible dollar that's submitted to them out of that 115. And we'll talk more about that right now. The MSBA policies, they don't deem every project cost to be eligible. This is not a Walpole specific thing. This happens on every MSBA project. It's a way that the MSBA helps to level projects from town to town. Obviously, towns have more resources, towns have different sites that they're building on, they have different needs. How do they try to stay comparable town to town, project to project when there's so many variables? There's 3 ways that they deem basically cost to be ineligible. Something can be categorically ineligible. It means the MSBA does not fund this on any project, no matter who you are, no matter what you want. They just don't deem it to be eligible. Swimming pools, turf fields, moving costs, things like that, off the table no matter what your project is, doesn't matter what town it is, it's category ineligible. The key for this project is in a middle school curriculum, whether you agree or disagree, they deem auditoriums to be ineligible as a space. They do that in elementary and middle schools. In a high school, an auditorium is fully fundable. They could change that next year and decide it's 100% eligible, but right now it's ineligible. The other way that they deem it to be ineligible is they have caps. So basically they say, we'll fund certain costs up to a certain amount, and then anything that goes over that cap is going to be deemed ineligible. Again, this is a way they level the playing field. The big example for us are site costs. Some schools are built, they don't have a lot of site work, they're more urban, they don't have necessarily roads or parking lots or playing fields or whatever of that nature. So they try to balance that with maybe some of the suburban schools that could do more on the site. The other one are any spaces that exceed the MSBA square footage guidelines. So as Mr. Breen mentioned, when you put together your plan at the beginning of the project for the MSBA, you come up with all the square footage that you need for your different spaces, classrooms, labs, circulation spaces, special education spaces. The MSBA has a guideline for each of those types of spaces, and basically the rooms have to fit within that size. If they go over, at the end of the day, when you total them all up, they can deem those spaces to be ineligible. Here's other examples of those three categories you can read. As I mentioned, category ineligible, big things are the swing space, so that's something you need to think about if you do a renovation project, if you have to put temporary classrooms on site, totally ineligible regardless of the project. Auditorium, synthetic turf, swimming pools, costs exceeding the caps. The two that really come into play for Walpole, and this is a big one, building costs exceeding $360 per square foot. What the MSBA is saying here is that you can't build a building for $360 a square foot. We're only going to reimburse you up to $360 a square foot. So the goal for the project and the goal for the towns is to make that square foot cost as effective as possible. Because that difference, everything above 360, they take right off the top of the project budget and they deem that ineligible, and then they take the reimbursement of what's left of that project budget. That's not a Walpole issue, that happens on every project. So the goal is to make the most cost-effective square foot building you can make and get that number as tight as possible. That being said, the construction market, as we'll see in a minute, is extremely aggressive, extremely expensive, and the MSBA, although they've increased it this last June, which actually benefits Walpole, it was $330 last year, we got an additional $30 a square foot this year, it still lags behind the market value of construction. The other item that's a big number for Walpole are the site costs. Obviously, we have site costs on this project because it's in an urban site, buildings in the middle of the campus, so to speak. This is the way that they level the playing field. Again, urban sites versus suburban sites, trying to keep costs at a relatively level platform. The other thing I'll note here is that cost base that exceed MSBA guidelines. We had very little, if any, square foot guidelines. Again, auditoriums categorically ineligible. The rest of the building, the MSBA found to be nearly 100% eligible for reimbursement, which included the additional classrooms that support the teaming structure. We have more classrooms in this building than the MSBA says a middle school needs, but again, it's all based on the town's educational program. They found all the classrooms to be eligible for reimbursement. And the third gym space, the MSBA says, oh, you only need one gym for the school, but the third space is for special education. It's supported by your educational program, 100% eligible. So how do those ineligible costs, and again, there's other little costs that factor in this, but these are the big takeaways. You have a total project budget of $115.7, which we talked about. They take the contingencies out of that equation, so the owner's contingencies that we talked, they just take those out of the equation for now, and then they look at all of the costs that are left, so $109 million. The three major ineligible costs on this project are the difference between the MSBA square foot cost and the market. $29 million they take off the top of the project. Has nothing to do with what Walpole wants to do with their project. It's just the square foot cost against what they're willing to reimburse. $4.5 million in costs that are over the 8%, 8% of site costs versus total construction off the top of the project. In the auditorium, because it was deemed ineligible, they take the cost of the auditorium after they factor out all the other square footages and all the calculations they go through, $2.5 million in reimbursement dollars not given back for the auditorium. Total that up, it's just over $37 million. Subtract that from your 109, you get a total basis of grant of $71 million. Take 55% of $71 million, you get your $38 million in reimbursement. When you apply that $38 million towards the whole project, roughly 32%, $78 million left for the town share. That's how the MSBA does it on every project. Walpole at the end of the day will be getting 32% of the overall budget back for this project. This chart, it's tough to see, but the lines that you need to focus on are the orange line. That is the average cost of construction for every MSBA job since they were reconstituted back in 2008. The first dot on the far left is the new Norwood High School. That was our project. That was the first dot 12 years ago. Now you see where the orange line is. That's the average cost of construction for schools. These are all high school, middle school, and elementary schools. The MSBA tracks every estimate that's done. So the blue dots and the blue pluses are different stages of estimates. The orange boxes are construction bids. And then the solid oranges are the ones that are actually gone to construction and the project is in construction. The dotted orange line is where the average cost is going over the next 2 years, going up to almost $630 a square foot. Walpole is currently below that average cost, And the red line shows you the gap between the average market cost of construction and what the MSBA reimburses, and that's how you get that huge number of 29 million off the top. Slide. So at the end of the day, after reimbursements, this project, the town will be left to fund approximately $78 million. And I'll turn this over to Jim to talk a little bit about taxes.
Sure. So I've been asked a lot about what's the overall annual tax impact, what's town meeting's role in this whole process, so I wanted to walk through that a little bit. So town meeting's role in this process is to appropriate the funds and authorize the borrowing for this project. That will be subject to approval of a debt exclusion on November 2nd. It's estimated that the average residential tax bill will increase by approximately $438 a year. This figure is based on a 30-year level fund debt paydown with a conservative interest rate of 3.5%. This figure could be less if interest rates remain in the 2% range. Next slide, please. On the commercial side, it's estimated that the commercial and industrial taxes will increase by about $1,068 per year. Overall, it's estimated that the residential taxpayers will pay just about 84%, which is roughly about $65 million. On the commercial industrial side, about 16%, which is about $12.7 million. Next slide. Overall financially, this project compares very well to other area projects that have been considered. As you can see, other projects have taken advantage of the 30-year borrowing option available for schools. Over the past few weeks, I've been asked, why not go with a 20 or 25-year borrowing versus a 30? The Select Board discussed this back in June, and some of the reasons considered and factored into going into the 30-year borrowing included the current middle schools were built in the mid-1960s, so we're looking at a 50-plus year useful life period. Borrowing for 30 years allows the tax impact each year to be lower and more manageable for the taxpayer. Under the current low interest rate environment, stretching out the cost provides relief to the current taxpayers, enables the future taxpayers to share in the burden. One other item of note is there are 4 other projects listed on the screen here that were approved via a debt exclusion in the past that are coming off the books. Those projects account for just about $115 on the average taxpayer. So you can look at it and say, the average net increase for once the library is paid off is just about $323 per year. Next slide, please. The common questions. Oh.
Yeah, so I'll take these two. A couple common questions that we get related to the project and again related to the cost is why not wait and get an actual bid prior to town meeting? So as Mr. Breen indicated in the beginning, when you join the MSBA's process, you have to follow the MSBA's process. It's a very thorough, it's a very detailed process. However, they require that the towns and districts approve the project cost after schematic design, which is the point that we're at now. Basically, they allow for a certain amount of funding to get you to this point, to do the due diligence, to do all the work that gets you to what you feel the project is going to cost, how long it's going to take, and come up with a reimbursement rate. They're vetting the project alongside of us the whole way, and they want the town to approve the project at that point before they authorize any more spending. Projects of this size, design fees alone could be up into the almost $10 million, and they don't want they don't want towns to go down that road, then to have the project be turned away. They don't want to be part of a project spending $10 million basically when they could be giving that to another town. So every town makes the decision at this point that goes through the MSBA project. This is not specific to Walpole. You can't have a bid in hand through the MSBA project. You can do the project by yourself and you want to have a bid in hand, absolutely. You just will not have any MSBA funding associated with it. So what happens if the project is not approved or the vote fails? And we have a couple scenarios at the end that we'll talk about. Basically, the district has to respond to the MSBA within 10 days with the vote results, analysis of why they think the project was not approved, and a plan for how it could be approved. And typically what ends up happening is the vote fails for a particular reason, and there's usually not a simple solution that's going to change people's minds to vote for the project. You're not going to be able to cut the cost of the project in half. It's just not that simple. Typically, the MSBA closes the project, and then Walpole would have to reapply. As some people have mentioned, is yes, you could just reapply and get back in the next year. There's no guarantee that you get back in, but that's what would happen. Walpole would go back to basically zero and have to resubmit a statement of interest, and until that statement of interest was accepted, and start the process all over again.
So we've been asked a lot about the future of Johnson Middle School. What's going to happen to it if this project's approved? The Select Board discussed this and listed some of the options that might be considered at their last meeting. They're not gonna touch upon it until the town election, until we definitively know what's gonna happen to the project. It's the select board's intention to eventually form a committee that will provide some recommendations as to the future use of the building. So, I know there's a lot of questions out there about it, but bottom line is, we're gonna wait and see what happens and then make some decisions.
Concerning the enrollment projections, a lot of people have asked, well, 905, how did you come up with that number? And did you just, go to the MSBA with that number? Really, as part of the eligibility phase deliverables, what the MSBA does is they require submission in what's called an enrollment projection application. And that includes data that's reported by the district, as well as data provided by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Massachusetts Department of Health, the U.S. Census Bureau, UMass Donahue Institute. So the school department worked in conjunction with town administration to complete all of these deliverables. And it also included the past 10 years of K-12 enrollment, building permits, both past and projected, residential developments, housing sales, collaboratives, out-of-district students, our private schools, and birth rates. And the MSBA then delivered a determination of an enrollment of 905 for our students' enrollment. And then you can see, I wanted to point out, because you look at our current enrollment, this is based on an October 1st enrollment data. We have 803 students at both middle schools. And you can see, when you look at the enrollment for the next several years, you can see that it's increasing. And from 2027 to 28, it's at 892.
Another common question is, well, how do you, if you don't have a bid in hand, how do you manage those costs moving forward if the project is approved? So the project budget of $115.7, as I mentioned, includes almost $5 million in market escalation to get us to when we believe construction is going to start sometime late next year. It also has $19.9, almost $20 million in different contingencies. We talked about that in the beginning, both an owner's construction contingency, an owner's soft cost contingency, a GMP contingency, which is the contractor's contingency, which would be in the contractor's contract, as well as design contingency. So there's obviously things that have not been designed yet in the school. We don't know exactly what that detail might look like. So there's room in the budget for designing those and including that in the future cost estimates. So the project has almost $20 million of contingency to manage this from here to the end of the project. Between now and when we actually go to construction, we'll have 3 complete estimates. So the way that the estimating works on these projects is not only does the architect do an estimate, but we do an estimate, both with professional estimators. We get together, we reconcile those estimates and come up with what we believe is the correct summarized and reconciled estimate. We'll be bringing a contractor manager at risk firm on, so a CM firm on. They will also be doing an estimate. So we'll have up to 3 estimates at every estimating point along the way from here until we start construction. By having a construction manager through the CM at risk process, we're able to bring that contractor on during the design phase to help with things like estimating, but also they have up-to-date market conditions, help manage that budget, check the progress of the design drawings for completeness, do constructability reviews. Are there more cost-effective ways to do things? Is there more cost-effective ways to phase the project? Are we thinking of everything? So that's an advantage. There's also on a CM at risk job is what's called a guaranteed maximum price. So the way that this works, at the end of the design phase, we'll put together a guaranteed maximum price with the CM firm. They will basically guarantee that the cost of the project will be completed for this project cost, barring any changes to project scope, meaning we add something or there's an unforeseen condition that no one knew was out there. They use their contingency, which is within their contract budget, to help manage some of these things before they become change orders. It's all open book accounting, so we see every single cost, both through the design phase, through construction from the CM firm. Those are all reviewed by the OPM and eventually reviewed and approved by the building committee. Everything will run through the building committee. And then as the MSBA forms, there's a school building committee, as Mark already alluded to. It has multiple members of the permanent building committee, and they will help manage the project from here all the way through construction and review and approve all final costs. So some of our history, we've been involved with multiple school projects in the last few years. Again, every town is in the same situation, same anxiety, same concerns over project costs. And all we can point to is our experience on these projects with the MSBA. As I mentioned, they make you go through this very detailed process for a reason. They don't want to be part of a project that has issues with either schedule or budget as well. They want it to be a success for the district and get people through the pipeline. We've done 6 projects in the last few years that have finished. You can see the approved budgets in the middle column there. That's what the people voted on at their town meeting and at their town ballot. That's the cost that we went into with the MSBA and the final cost of where those projects are ending up. Some of them are just starting construction now. The Ashland is a unique example, or a pertinent example, because they're in the pipeline this past year. So they've been dealing with the market that's out there now, trying to put together a project cost, trying to keep their design on budget to stay within that project cost, and they're starting construction on cost for that $84 million this month, actually. What happens next in the funding process if the project is approved? So as Mr. Breen mentioned, the MSBA board approved this project. They approved the scope, they approved the budget, they sent that paperwork to the town. That town is sitting, waiting for a town meeting and the vote to happen. Part of the MSBA process is that you have 120 days from when the board makes that decision to finalize your funding, to secure the community authorization and execute those documents. So there's a reason that we try to time when the project gets to the MSBA board with when town meetings and town votes are held, so you fit within that 120-day window. Again, this is the MSBA's process of keeping projects moving through the pipeline. And as I mentioned previously, the town must approve the full project budget at town meeting and at the ballot in order to move forward. Once that happens, town meeting and the ballot, those documents will be executed. There'll be a project funding agreement, which is the next contract with the MSBA, at which stage the design phase would start and the town would start submitting expenses for reimbursement on a monthly basis. We've been doing that all along, but we have no more funding to spend until the project is approved. But those reimbursements happen monthly throughout the course of the entire project. Timeline for the project if it's approved. So design would start immediately after town meeting this fall. It would wrap up sometime late next fall. Because we have a construction manager at risk on board, we'll have the ability to start some of the construction earlier. We won't necessarily have to wait for all of the project design documents to be done, but certain aspects of it, like the site work or maybe excavation for foundations, potentially getting the access roads in, et cetera, could start early and take advantage of the summer schedule next year when school's out of session, with full construction starting later next year, early winter next year. Overall, the project's roughly about 32 months, start to finish. That includes that early phase, that includes building the building, and then eventually knocking down bird and finishing the site with the parking lot and the landscaping. So the project will basically be done in 3 major phases. The building will open right now, targeted for the school year of 2024. So this happens on a lot of school projects. The building is completed, the building opens, the old school moves over, but we're obviously have to take the building down, finish the parking lot, et cetera, and that project will go on into 2025. We currently just did that on Kennedy Middle School. They moved in last January, and we took the old building down and finished up the site this spring. And then final reimbursement from the state. The MSBA holds the final 5% of reimbursement until everything is completed on the project, all the final paperwork is in, all of the commissioner reports, everything is done, submitted, and they give you that final 5%. It takes a couple months, but we typically budget about a year.
All right, folks, so we're down to the last 3 slides now, so we can all perk back up and be ready for the Q&A session. If we could pull back a little bit maybe from the details and the nitty-gritty, I know that the team has done a great job in pulling all that information together. But what we want to focus on really now is the why now, and what are some of the really relevant pieces of information that are driving this decision, apart from all the facts and figures that Brian has put together so well for us. And it really goes back over the last 10, 20, 30, and 40 years where we've addressed a lot of the infrastructure projects here in town. We've done public safety, we've done council on aging, we've looked at all of these needs the town has, and this is the next project in that list. And there haven't been any improvements made to school infrastructure and upgrades in over 20 years, and actually the middle schools is substantially longer than that, so it's certainly time to be doing this. And as we consider kind of some of the growth around town, things that are going on, you know, the growth of town, people continue to move here. Walpole is a very desirable community, as we all know, obviously, but that continues to put pressure on our school buildings. And as enrollment increases, these old buildings just can't hold up to that. And so we need to make that decisive action now so that we're ready for the future and we can be prepared. And fortunately for us, that really then rolls into the next 30 years into the future. And we talked a little bit about the borrowing period and how long we're going to be paying for that and the burden on the taxpayers. Well, that allows us to spread it out. And so as people move into town, they can share in that burden. As younger people and younger families move into town, they can have obviously the benefit of the school, but they'll also then share in that tax burden. And it doesn't solely fall the people over the first 5 to 10 years. Next slide, please. So obviously we've covered everything about the need being recognized by the state, the fact that the MSBA and the state is going to chip in and reduce the cost by 32%, and we can't emphasize that enough, how big a deal that is. The time is right now for borrowing rates, as we all know from the news. They're at historic lows. That won't last forever, so while that may not have been part of the plan originally, certainly it would be reasonable to capitalize on that now. And those rates will only go up, as will construction costs. I know Brian talked a little bit about escalation for materials, escalation for labor. All of that is going to go up over time. And so the sooner we can get this project in the works, the more money we can save in that regard. And we also have some cautionary tales that are out there. Brian has talked a little bit about what would happen if the override didn't pass, what would we do? And so that goes to talking about a little bit of the what if or what about scenarios. What if we had done one middle school and then another? Or what if the override doesn't passes? Well, in Lincoln, Massachusetts, the elementary school there is, like I say, a bit of a cautionary tale because their override failed. But they were still stuck with the old infrastructure, and they were still stuck with a growing town, growing enrollment. So something had to be done. So in the interim, there was a number of years where the students continued to go to the same old decrepit schools that didn't have any upgrades put into them. And they ultimately did. The residents saw the need. After a few years, they had no choice. They had to upgrade the schools. And so they did so completely on their own dime. So while that's not meant to be a scare tactic, and it's not a like-for-like comparison, I think we need to take that into account when we're looking at this situation and how we want to move forward. And the cost-saving measures that being part of the MSBA really affords us. So switching then to the next slide, I'll flip it back to Brian, and like I said, trying to think about some of these what if and what about scenarios. Anybody who's been to the other public information sessions have heard some of these what abouts and what ifs. So Brian will walk us through that now.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we do a lot of school projects, and every town has very similar concerns and anxieties that go through the same process, and is it the right time, why now? And what we try to do is look at a lot of different options that they're making the right decision. We're not necessarily advocating for one decision over another, but it's the right decision for the town. And a lot of questions are out there is, well, why don't you just renovate? Why don't you do an ad reno? And just to clarify, the 19 options that started on this project, the MSBA makes you look at a base repair. So just upgrade the Bird School to code, don't do anything aesthetically, no new fixtures, no new technology, just meet all the code requirements of the day. Structural, building code, accessibility, energy code. Put a price on that, send that into the MSBA. That went into the MSBA. What about an ad renovation? Can you add reno just for the Bird, or can you do an ad reno for the combined school? We looked at all those options as well. And at the end of the day, the most cost-effective solution from the town's perspective was combining the schools and doing one new school to solve the issue of both schools. But the question is still out there. Why don't you look at a couple different options? And the building committee and the school committee also looked at those decisions before they decided to consolidate. So what you see here at the top is the current project. Town meeting, up to this point, you spent $1.5 million. If it's approved, the red line is where we're at. If it's approved, you have about a year of design, 2 years or so, 2.5 years of construction. The project's done in 2025, $115.7 million. The town shares $78 million. What if it fails? It fails, you come back, you want to go right back into the MSBA pipeline. The earliest you get in the MSBA pipeline, you'd apply next year. It will take you all of 2022 to do a statement of interest, and assuming you get accepted on the first try, it will take you all of 2022. You have to go back to town meeting, get another 1.5 for that, do the exact same process that we just went through again, get into their eligibility period, get that done, hire an OPM, you don't get to carry us over, you don't get to carry this architect over, and then start the project all over again. As I mentioned earlier, we're 3 years since that first SOI, since the SOI is accepted for Walpole. So that puts you approximately 2025 to get back to the same decision point. Even if you came back with the exact same project, for the same scope that you have right now, 3 years of escalation, design, construction, that project could be upwards of $133 million. If you get the same reimbursement percentage from the MSBA, the town share is now $78 million. So it doesn't pass this year, you come back, you start the process immediately next year, you come back with the exact same process. Cost of construction only goes up, as you saw in that chart from the MSBA, it comes out $133 million. What if you want to say, fine, we don't want to wait for the MSBA, let's do a new combined middle school without the MSBA. Okay, we have to go back to town meeting this year or next year, get a $1.5 million appropriation or roughly that to start the whole thing over again, get an OPM, do design, feasibility, schematic design, design it, do construction. You might finish it close to when you're gonna finish this project, say 2027 at the earliest, but you have no MSBA funding. The cost of construction's gone up slightly to $126, $125 million. No reimbursement. The town funds all $125 million. That's the Lincoln example that Ben just spoke about. What if you just separate the projects and do them individually? The BIRD, so the MSBA allowed the enrollment study to be done for just the BIRD or combined. They recognize the needs in both schools, but like I said, they only approve one project at a time. But what if you just did the BIRD, okay? You spent 1.5, you have to do another statement of interest, go back to the MSBA, get another 1.5 roughly, go through the whole process again, get to this point 3 years from now in 2025 for just the BIRD, design it, build it. Cost of that school, roughly 95 million. Town share, same reimbursement rate, 65 million. But you haven't done anything to Johnson yet. You want to do that with the MSBA, so then you start immediately after BIRD, because the MSBA will not let you do two projects at once. You do another statement of interest, assuming you get accepted immediately. Town meeting, 1.5 million to get the Johnson study going. Do the same process, eligibility, OPM, designer, feasibility. 3 years, get to a decision point like we're at tonight for Johnson. We're at 2032. Design, construct, 2 years to do Johnson renovations. Total project cost roughly, and again, the numbers we're using here is an ad reno, the least expensive option that we looked at is of the 19, escalated over time. $200 million total project between the two projects combined. Town share $141 million, and you're done in 2035. We don't want to wait for the MSBA. We're going to do the BIRD with MSBA. We're going to come back next year, statement of interest, same thing. $94 million, just like we knew up top. We're going to do Johnson a year later. We don't want to wait for the MSBA. And some towns are doing that. We're working with Wellesley right now. They're doing 2 elementary schools simultaneously, one with the MSBA, one without it. We have both of those projects. The issue is you get the reimbursement from the state, $94 million, you get reimbursed $64 million. All right, pretty good deal, but you're paying for Johnson entirely by yourself. $70 million inflated over time, $80 million, $150 million town share. So we do this with a lot of our towns because everyone thinks it's just easier if you just split them up, if you just add reno. And sometimes ad renos are a good solution for certain towns, and we can talk more about this if you have specific questions. The issue that you have here is you have 2 schools that you need to address. If you had one combined middle school already, then ad reno might be a more cost-effective solution, but we'll turn that over when we get to question and answers.
So just 2 quick last words here before we wrap it up. This is the 11th community forum that we've had on this project, and so I just want to acknowledge all the effort that Dr. Goff and the administration team, Chair Breen, everyone on the school building committee, Jim Johnson, everyone at Town Hall, everyone on the school committee, and the folks at Walpole Media, the staff at all of these schools and places that we've had this roadshow have put an amazing amount of effort into this, and I really appreciate it. I know a lot of people do, so I think that needs some acknowledgement. So thank you to everyone for doing that. And also thank you to everyone for coming tonight. I see a lot of RTMs out here in the crowd preparing for town meeting. That's fantastic. Really appreciate folks coming out, getting informed on these issues, and being willing to engage in discussions. So with that being said, I'll turn it back over to Mark for question and answer.
So if we could, if anybody has any questions or comments, if you could just make your way down to the front and take turns at the microphone, just as if we're at town meeting. Don't be shy.
Thank you. This one I think would be for Dr. Goff. I was looking at the schematic floor plan, and to me this is probably at this point in time, as I'm making a decision, the most important page in the packet. So I know you already spoke about some of the enhancements to the STEM curriculum, and that to me is extremely important. So what I'd like to know is, could you provide us some more additional specific information as to how the new middle school will effectively support STEM education and how it will allow for a more enhanced curriculum, and what you envision that curriculum might look like? what basically I'm interested in knowing is, are the middle school students going to receive, what are they going to receive in the future that they don't receive now as a result of this schematic plan? And do you believe if they do receive something more, do you believe that it'll have a domino effect and increase the curriculum at the high school level when these middle school students get to that point? Now, I see in the schematic there are 6 labeled science classrooms and 2 technology classrooms for the 2nd and 3rd floor. I'm not sure about what the 1st floor has for STEM. I'm not familiar with that abbreviation. However, I do know that the MSBA released not too long ago a 70-page report that was entitled Best Practices for STEM Learning Spaces. And I want to know if we're going to be following any part of that as best practices for this new middle school. Thank you.
I'm gonna let, Bill, do you want to start? And then.
Well, sure, I can start. First of all, thank you for that question. It's a really important one. Our educational plan was created based on our current curriculum, our current programming. But of course, when we wrote the plan and envisioned this building, we think beyond what we currently offer. First of all, to speak to the just the pure resources that will be available in each one of these classrooms will far exceed what we're able to and what we're available to give now. Some of our spaces in some of our middle schools use converted art classrooms right now as their science labs with a single sink and not adequate enough square footage. So that alone, we know each of our science rooms will be outfitted with the appropriate technology resources, tools, and all things to be considered to make inquiry learning the most important part of how we ensure our kids learn not only about science, but all things that are STEAM. To your question about technology, there are 2 technology classrooms, and again, that is consistent with our current education plan, but we are really excited about what we can offer beyond that. We think about hydroponics labs, we think about a broadcast journalism studio that meets the needs of all students and that supports our incredible morning announcements to go well beyond what we can currently do now. And some of those things, you know, that we envision and that we picture for our students, some of those things, like you just said, you talked about the plans for the future, we'll continue to build on and see, you know, not only what the MSBA recommends, but what the science curriculum suggests we need to do more of, as those state standards are oftentimes changing. Answering questions about a building that will be, you know, done in 3 years around curriculum can be difficult. But I can tell you that when we had our visioning session with our teachers, they were so excited about the opportunity for 21st century learning. We do have restrictions. These buildings put some restrictions on what our teachers can do and what we can offer. And this building will allow us to go well beyond and ensure learning for all our students and ensure that we have the resources to meet the needs of every single student that comes through our doors. I think that's probably at least a general answer for now. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, thanks for stealing everything. No, I appreciate it. No, the other piece is too, when we look at the programming even after school, you know, a lot of students, not only during the day, but what we consider before and after school is the hook that keeps our children here and engages them. When you look at your science, your engineering, your tech, you know, the technology programs that you can even offer after school that we can't do now. We can't do it now based on the space or the resources we have, but we also can't with the enrollment. So when you have an increased enrollment, you increase that interest, you have the staff that you're able to combine to be able to run those programs, as Bill mentioned, not only during the day, but during after school as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks everybody for all the work everybody's put into this over the last few years and for putting together this presentation. One of the questions I think that's going to arise is the cost of alternatives, and I wasn't sure if I could see this on the last slide. What was the, in your diligence in looking at the alternatives, what was the estimated cost for renovating the two individual buildings as a solution?
Yeah. We have a slide in the back. So the,
Yeah.
so
The,
part of,
the last slide there, I'm not sure it was on that, was that on the last slide? I couldn't-
it took one of the costs.
Yeah, I
actually have one
can't,
in
I
there,
couldn't make that out.
there.
'Cause I think this is the question that's going to come
Yeah.
up for, any opposition to the plan is, I'm certain that there was great diligence done in all the alternatives. And I wouldn't want that to be lost in the discussion, and I think this is probably the question that's gonna come up is,
Yeah.
if we don't do this, what's our other choice? So, and the price will come up.
Yeah, so part of the initial discussions on consolidation, and as I mentioned, the second deliverable there, the preferred schematic report to the MSBA requires every project has to carry a base repair of the school in question, so in this case, just the bird. That estimated cost, and it's not on this slide, that estimated cost was $56 million. We also looked at an add renovation of adding to this existing building and renovating it to create a school large enough for the 905 enrollment, and that was over $110 million. So it was comparable to a new school, and there's a couple factors that go into that. Typically, when you talk about renovation or add renos, as we mentioned, if you don't have a building, if you don't have a place to take the entire student population out, you're now increasing the duration of those projects because you're moving kids around, building a part of the building, finishing part of the building. You increase the duration, all the costs go up, contractor, architect, OPM, et cetera. You also might need to have swing spaces like modular trailers. You might put a whole grade out in modular trailers and then shuffle the grades through that. So that's how an add reno of a combined building could be more, or even as expensive as a brand new building. One of the charts that we looked at, that we presented to the building committee and also to the school committee when they were thinking about doing the project separately or doing them as consolidated. So a consolidated middle school back at the time of preferred schematic, estimates are anywhere between 114 for add reno to 126 for new, and there's a whole bunch of options that were in that category. Bird, reno, add reno or new, roughly 82 to 95 million. Johnson only, add reno or new, roughly 82 to 95 million. When you add those options together, the two schools together would be 164 to 190 million. And then again, if you're waiting to do Johnson, that only increases that cost. So this was some of the analysis that was done back at the beginning at preferred schematic to decide whether or not a consolidated school made sense from a financial perspective. And then we also looked at it with the building committee and school committee. If you factor in MSBA reimbursements, and again, that timeline of if you do one project now and want to do another project with the MSBA, how long you might need to wait to do that second project, costs go up, et cetera. And what does that look like comparing to do a project now? So the project, a consolidated middle school now, roughly 114 to 126. Again, this was before we did all the schematic design estimates. Anticipating somewhere 40 to 44 million in MSBA reimbursements for a project cost somewhere of a town share of 74 to 82 million. The same thing, Bird with MSBA, Johnson without it, 136 to 157 town share. Bird only, Johnson only.
So can I interrupt for just a second? When you refer to a consolidated middle school as an alternative to building a combined school, what's the reference to consolidation? You're still talking about the two structures?
No, we're talking about
How do you-
increasing the size of this building large enough to encompass the Johnson student
Oh, right,
population.
okay,
So it's a
Right.
major addition in addition to
Okay,
a major
gotcha.
renovation.
All right.
Right.
And so that's the top figure
So
there,
that's add
114.
reno. So if you look, so the range of that top number was a consolidated middle school, whether it's add reno or new, was roughly 114 to 126. So this was getting to a decision point of, does a consolidated school make financial sense versus two individual projects back in late last year. And the decision moving forward was, yes, we should look at add reno, we should look at a new school because it's more financially effective than doing the two schools individually, no matter how you look at them in the timing of
Yeah, I
this.
certainly appreciate the
Yep.
leveraging doing the new building.
And then part
So
of the.
I'm just trying to get
sorry.
out, when people try to pose alternatives, the two things they're gonna pose are, what would be the cost of taking this building, adding and renovating and making it a consolidated building, which I think is your top figure there,
Yep.
roughly, and which is similar to what
Similar
the
cost,
price
correct.
is. Or the other option that keeps coming up is, why don't you just renovate the two buildings individually?
Correct.
And do I see that
So the
figure
the
there?
middle section is if you do a bird only,
Yep.
meaning bird school, bird enrollment only, what would the cost of that project be?
Right.
And those estimates were roughly in 82 to 95 million to renovate this building.
Okay.
Again, it's inhabited
And-
renovation.
And so the cost of the two individual renovations
Combined
comes
is
in at
136
higher,
to
and
157.
I presume that neither of those options qualifies for the reimbursement, or perhaps not as much reimbursement? What would be the
So,
status of that?
part of the MSBA process is the school department needed to decide what enrollment study they wanted to follow, either a single 450 student building or a combined 905. The middle section here was looking at 2 individual projects, so bird only, so just the bird building, add reno or make a new bird building just for the bird students, roughly 82 to 95 million between add reno or new costs. The MSBA reimbursement for bird only, about 28 to 33 million. A Johnson only building, which is the third line in the middle there, and add reno or new, so a separate project just for Johnson without the MSBA would cost you 82 to 95 million. You wouldn't get any reimbursement. Combine those two together of 2 projects, 136 to 157 to the taxpayer.
Right, so in answering the question, what's the primary contributing factor to tackling the 2 buildings individually as a renovation project costing more than the proposal tonight? What's the best answer for that?
So
Because that's what's gonna come up, is
so
people are
tackling
gonna
the
say,
two-
how, people are gonna ask how trying to renovate the 2 individual buildings would cost more than making a new building. Now, I personally understand,
Yep.
but what is the answer for the primary contributing factor for that cost exceeding the current cost?
So when the preliminary studies were done, the least expensive option for each individual building was roughly 82 to 95 million dollars per building, versus a combined building at 115 million dollars.
Okay, so individually, renovating either of the buildings individually is in that 82 to 95
Correct.
dollar range.
So then you have to do 2 of them, doubling.
And the reason that is such a large proportion of the current proposal is because of all the retrofitting, and is that what makes it so hard? Is that
Right, what goes-
you're basically having to squeeze a solution into kind of a clunky existing architecture?
No, not necessarily. That can be part of it, but also, like I mentioned, it tends to make the durations of those projects longer, because you're just not emptying the building, allowing the contractor to renovate the building as quickly as
Oh,
possible.
right,
You're
that's a
doing it in
good point,
stages. You're incurring more costs because now the project team is on the project longer, in addition to just the cost of the
Okay,
construction.
so duration cost.
And you're paying for, in this case, you'd be paying for temporary facilities for classrooms. So when you add all those together, it starts to creep that cost up. You know, it's not quite half as much, but it's 75% of a new building.
Okay, that
versus
makes a
that
lot of
economy
sense.
of scale,
That
yep.
does make a lot of sense.
Right.
That's a great answer. And what was so under the current proposal, what is the plan for sort of juggling the students during, I didn't catch that.
Under the current proposal, the bird schools remain in operation. We'll have temporary access and things of that nature, but the school will be untouched during construction. The fields will be untouched. Johnson obviously will be untouched. And then when the new building is done, all the students will move into the new building, and then we'll take down bird. And that's quite common on a lot of school projects. A lot of towns do not have other spaces to put buildings, and we end up building buildings right next to the existing school. We did that most recently in Natick. We did it in Norwood High School. Just about every school project we've done, you built the new building right next to the old building.
Okay, so there really will be no operational downtime expected.
No operational downtime. I mean, there's going to be the complexities of, temporary entrances and different drop-off loops, but that's something that we'll work through as we go through design and work through with the construction manager.
Okay. Very good, thanks. Again, I appreciate all the work that's been done here.
Anybody else?
Hi, I just wanted to ask some questions about the $438 number. Jim, I know when you came up with that number, there's a number of things that went into that, including a borrowing rate, and I just wanted to ask a little bit about that. So the 438 number, which is the cost to the average tax, to the taxpayer based upon an average assessed value in town, which as I understand it is approximately 556,000, correct? So you.
Yes, 556.
Okay. And when you looked at the 438 number, you were using a borrowing rate of 3.5%, correct?
That is correct.
Excellent. And have there been other projects that have been coming in at different rates?
Yes, there has been. So would you like me to
Yep.
expand on that a little bit? So back in March, we went out to borrow for the Fields project. It was about an $8 million project overall. And we got an interest rate of just about 1.06%. our financial advisor who's here with me tonight, he told me a few weeks ago, you'll likely never see that number. Recently, they went out for another town, for a community. I think it was a similar type of borrowing. They get about a 2% interest rate. So I ran some numbers at what would 2% cost to the average household? 2.5, 3%, and obviously 3.5. So at 2%, we estimate it could be about $362 prior to the 115 falling off there. So there's a range there, but we just don't know what the future's gonna hold. We tried to be, even not only this project, with the fields, with the police station, fire station, council on aging, we were conservative in our estimates, and that paid off. That helped us kind of roll the ball forward, and we're able to do some other projects, so.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I understand that you have to use a conservative estimate, but I just want people to understand where the 438 is coming from. You just spoke about the second point I wanted to make, the 115. That number is based upon, as I understand it, we talked a little bit about that at the select board meeting the other night. It's based upon the fact that there is some debt rolling off of the debt schedule.
Sure.
We've been getting some questions about that, so I just wanted you to go a little bit into that and explain where that 115 amount comes from.
So that 115 makes up 4 different projects. Those projects are the high school renovation, which is set to be paid off in fiscal year 25. The Elm Street renovation and the Boyden renovation, which are both set to be paid off in 26. And the library override, which is set to be paid off in FY 30. So when you look at that, those projects were over and above the approved Proposition 2.5. So those amounts are eventually coming off the books as we progress through the years.
Great. So the bottom line is if you take the 438 number, that, depending on what borrowing rate, which I know you have no control over, and you were advised to use the 3.5, but that amount could go down to 362 if we're looking at a 2% borrowing rate. And then by fiscal year 2030, if you roll off the 115, you could get as low as 247. Not making any guarantees, but I just want to present the numbers for everyone.
That would be a great scenario.
Great. Excellent. So I have a hard time understanding this stuff when we're talking about it in words. So what we've done is prepared a graphic that I'm going to leave on the back table for everybody, whoever wants to see it. I just find that looking at it in that form is a little bit more user-friendly. It's a complicated topic, obviously, the debt schedule and different borrowing rates. Everyone knows who's refinancing mortgages. You don't have control over this, but I do think it helps inform the discussion, because just from walking around, that's the number one thing that I'm hearing is people are worried about the cost of this, which we can understand, and we think that this is a very prudent way to handle this by waiting for MSBA funding, but just giving people more information on where we get the numbers from, I think would be helpful. So thank you for your time.
No problem.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I just have a question. In regard to construction costs, I know you mentioned there's like a 5% cost factor built in. With the current supply line issues and construction costs going up, if you look at the paper, any building channel costs are now exceeding 15 to 20%. How is that going to be managed if we end up in that scenario where the costs exceed your 5%? And what's the total line? One of the concerns I have as a taxpayer is on, for Jim Johnson, is on the ballot question. There is no specified amount that we're voting on as a taxpayer. What's the maximum that the taxpayer is going to be on the hook for before we have to start looking at scaling back this project to some degree?
I'll take the first part.
Yeah, sure.
So thanks for your question. So exactly right. So the market is definitely volatile. Right now the estimate contains some escalation based on what estimators are seeing out there. But the process that's in place is we go through this on every project, no matter what the market is looking like. When those estimates are done, we'll have the advantage of actually having the contractor as part of that project team, talking directly with subs, talking directly about availability, have the ability to possibly talk, what products or equipment are more readily available, have less impact, because the market has been fluctuating. Not everything's gone up, not everything's going, like, it's kind of been a roller coaster. One month is this material, 1 month is that material. The other thing we need to look at is lead times of equipment, the types of equipment that we spec. So we're fully aware of what that market is doing. But like I said, we will have those checkpoints along the way, kind of taking the pulse of where that project estimate is, and then working with the building committee and the school building committee to help manage, what is in the project, what is not in the project, how we're able to either keep the costs in line, or we're able to do trade-offs or something of that extent. But that's normal in every project, kind of regardless of the market.
And Jim, will the cost of this school exceed $116,000? Is the taxpayer, if costs exceed, are we going to be on the hook for the rest of that?
So I don't know if you had a chance to grab the Q&A handout in the back of the room, but I tried to address that as part of one of the opening questions here. So town meeting's role is to authorize the town to raise and appropriate funds to construct and furnish a combined middle school at the site of the Bird Middle School. So basically, the motion on town meeting on Saturday is for $115,768, 814. So just under $116 million. We can't exceed that. If November 2nd comes and the taxpayers vote yes on that, we can't go above and beyond that amount right there. So basically, we'd have to come back to town meeting, but I think that answers your question.
I think so, yes. And final question, in terms of the MSBA grants that are coming back, it sounds like we extend the funding first, the grants come back at a point in time, or is this coming right off the top?
No, you approve the full borrowing, and then as you expend funds, so every month we send every project expenditure for that month into the MSBA. They audit that and send a reimbursement back monthly. We've been doing that for the last year to date on the 1.5. So typically they do they call them payment requests. They do one payment request per month. So typically the town receives a reimbursement monthly up to that 95% threshold throughout the project.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Hello, how's everyone?
Good.
We know each other already. I'm one of the neighbors who's impacted. But I have several questions that came up tonight, and it's a complex program as you've been describing. And I appreciate the immense amount of work that went into this and the years that went into it and all of the different iterations that have to have been considered. I still have a few questions I just want to put on the table which I have not heard addressed. One is, to me, this looks like a high school. It has a beautiful auditorium which is going to be used throughout the year, weekends, nights, and so there will be traffic coming and going and impacting the wider neighborhood pretty much 24/7. It looks beautiful. I'm actually a teacher, and I'm a musician, and love the idea of an incredible auditorium. I mean, and I have kids. I love that concept. But to me, this doesn't seem like the amount of scope for us. I want it in writing that this won't become the high school. That would be something I think should go on the plan, that the town knows that this is not really what this is about. That's like to put on the table. I also feel that, to your point earlier, the gentleman over here with, I don't know his name, mentioned that you don't intend for this to be scare tactics, and yet, with due respect, that's how it's being presented. In other words, if we don't approve this plan, then we're doomed. This building is not in good shape. The other building is not in good shape. You guys have spent a lot of time. It's like this plan or bust. So it kind of feels like an ultimatum to me. That's what I'm hearing. That's not a question. I'm just putting it out there. One resident's views, just for everyone to sort of think about. I just don't, my gut feeling is this isn't the best plan, but we haven't really seen alternatives. We've just heard discussion about why other ones aren't good. $83 million for renovation just sounds like a lot to me, but another thing on the table is the 3 years of impact to the students who will be attending this school while there's construction happening. The construction trucks coming and going, which again, the neighborhood is going to be immensely impacted, and you say on the back page of the handout, are there any traffic changes that are going to be made? And yes, you have tried to be responsive to the neighbors' concerns. However, as we well know, the road is going to be there. On your map, it looks like it's about half as wide as a baseball diamond field, which is a pretty big road. We see the buses coming and going. And we've had these conversations, Mr. Jarvis. I don't feel confident that the neighborhood will not be significantly impacted. It's a big school that needs a lot of infrastructure, and that's why. I understand. I understand that the people on the Washington Street side don't want a huge impact as well, even though there's a major road there. But just so the community understands, the homes on that East Street side and in that community did not buy property along a busy road. And that's what's going in. And it's going to be 24/7 because of this incredible, beautiful project with a community center and all of the different opportunities to use the spaces and all of the fumes and the lights. We're basically being told to sign. I know what you said, it's not going to exceed $116 million, but costs always go up. You always have 10% more. It sounds like we're being asked to sign a blank check.
So could I answer?
Please, address that one thing, then I'm just putting a couple of
Yeah.
things on the table, but
So
please.
I wrote down a couple of notes for you. So your first question was, how can we assure the people that the town of Walpole can't turn this into a high school 10 years from now? So what the motion that the town meeting is set to consider is worded as follows, the first few lines. It's regularly moved and seconded that the town appropriate the sum of $115,768,814 for the purpose of paying costs in constructing and furnishing a new grade 6 through 8 combined middle school to be located at 625 Washington Street in Walpole, Mass. So what we're doing is we're saying town meeting is the body that basically serves as our Congress. They are telling us they're appropriating that money, and they're saying, we're telling everyone this is going to be a combined middle school. So it's in writing there. As far as the blank check, we can't exceed that amount. We don't have the authority to go over that amount that the town meeting's authorizing here tonight. And just one last point, as far as, you know, I've listened to your concerns about Grasshopper Lane there. I've been a part of some of those meetings, and I can tell you that Brian and I have worked on a project in the past, the police station, as a council on aging. It's a smaller road, Gleaston Court is the name of the road. Those neighbors came to us, they approached us and said, listen, we don't really want to have the bright lights of the police station in back. We're concerned with that. We worked with those people throughout the construction process to put a vinyl fence up there, blocking the light from coming in. We also sloped the hill so it's gradually away from their property so water doesn't get into it. We planted trees there. We're not going to shut the door and say, this is happening, sorry, Grasshopper, it's going in. We're going to work with you folks, just like we worked with the people on Gleason Court. So
Well, that's
Bridget,
good to hear.
I'll let you take
That's
the
the
rest
first
of it.
I've heard that stated in
Yeah, and
concrete words.
I know that you mentioned, scare tactics, those that Mr. Barrett presented, those are facts, and I know that you said the building is not, it's not in good shape. It's in worse shape. You want to talk not in good shape. There's a lot of, if people were able to take a tour and just see the state of this building, and we either do it now, or we're gonna pay a lot later in the future.
Respectfully, why was this not addressed years before?
The town has done, I have to say that the town of Walpole, they have consistently invested in proper maintenance and upkeep of the building. It's 55 years old, and the building has reached the end of its functional life of all of its major systems. And not only that, we look at a spacing issue. 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, we didn't have the programming that we have now to keep our special education students in district as rightfully so as they deserve that education. We do not want to send students out of district. We keep them in our district to educate them. We do reverse inclusion. That creates more room. That is the capacity. You look at the programs, the 21st century learning. It's functional space. We've converted, we've moved, closed down an art room to make space for a special education in district program. We've closed down a media center and we split it in two to make room for a classroom and a special education program, and moved the media center to the library, and actually used the library when it closed, when we had the new library. We went and took all of those resources. We scoured that old library, and it's all in Bird Middle School. We have a closet that's used for speech and language. We basically have 3 closets that are used for our guidance department to service our students who have significant social and emotional needs. I can go on and on. We have used every available space in the school, and it has reached the end of its functional life. So that's what we mean when we're talking
Okay,
about that.
I appreciate that. As I mentioned, I'm a teacher, and appreciate, ooh, this is a hot mic. Appreciate the need to address all students. I wanted to add that I have heard a couple of teachers say that they're concerned combining the schools and making it so large will create, not my word, more of a factory type of experience for the teachers and the students.
Yeah, that's a good question. If we noted on the screen where we had the floor plan, that's why we're creating small neighborhoods. We have sets of neighborhoods. You're having a neighborhood school, so you get that small community feel in the fabric of a larger school. So you have teaming. Teaming was mentioned 79 times, and neighborhood schools were mentioned 139 times in our visioning
what?
sessions.
And you're visioning with
in
teachers?
Yes, in our visioning sessions with our teachers and our community forums with our teachers. We had significant visioning sessions with our teachers from both middle schools. And the desire was to create these small teams within the fabric of the larger school.
So what will the ratio be, students to teachers? Are you going to hire more teachers?
No, because when you combine the middle schools, you'll be able to have that teaming. And then some of the, depending on when you're restructuring, in terms of the programs that you're offering, you're able to create new programs.
Could I make a point as well? If we were to decide to bait and switch and somehow turn this into a high school, I think the MSBA would ask for its money back.
Well, I have no idea, but my question is, 10 years from now, it could come up, well, the high school no longer serves the needs of the high school students. We're going to readjust for the middle school.
They, I would think, would ask for a prorated amount of their money back then.
Okay, well, thank you for listening.
I'll just respond to that one last question. Is the middle school's not designed for 4 grades. The high school would be a bigger building programmatically. The high schools we're building today are 220,000 square feet, and this is 160,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for all your work. I have a quick question. Somewhere along the slides, there's mentioned something about town and CM will negotiate a guaranteed max price. And I wanted to ask more about what that meant.
Right, so the contract, when you do a CMIT risk process, is called a guaranteed maximum price, and you have the ability to work with the construction manager or the contractor all the way from design until you put together the final cost for the project, and they come into the project. There's a formal hiring process similar to an OPM or to a designer where the contractors submit their statements of qualifications. The review is done by the building committee based on qualifications. The firms are shortlisted. Firms are interviewed. They have to submit their entire staff. They have to submit what they believe are their overhead costs and their staffing costs for the project. And then we basically work with them through the entire design phase to put together their budget for the project in line with the total project budget. And at the end of the day, the contract is actually called a guaranteed maximum price, which means that they have their own risk where they have their cost for construction, they have their contingency in the budget, and if they exceed any of those costs where it isn't a change order from the owner or an unforeseen condition, it comes out of their contingency and their overhead. So at the end of the day, they need to use their own money to give you a guaranteed maximum price. Now, things might change where you say, hey, we want to add, an additional bookcase or something, and that's a change order. That obviously would increase their contract because it wasn't in the original scope. But if everything stays the same on the project and it's not a change from the owner, they are guaranteeing to build the project for the price they give you when they start construction.
Okay, just to make sure I understand. So if they come in and they say 115.7 million, and there's no change orders, that's what they're guaranteeing?
They're gonna come, the 115 includes the construction cost, not all of it is construction. The construction cost is estimated about 92 million. So when
Okay.
they come in, they're gonna be working with a $92 million
million,
budget,
okay.
right? And the goal is that they're gonna give you a guaranteed price of, if nothing changes, we'll guarantee to build this for 92 million.
Okay. And a question, I know, realizes it doesn't affect the 115 we're talking about tonight, but I do know a question came up in regards to the cost effectiveness of having one school in regards to the cost of running the school. And I didn't see anything on here, I wasn't sure if you have that information available, because that is it's a run cost.
So there are three buckets that we've considered. The first would be deferred maintenance. It's very costly to keep these two buildings running in the condition that they're in, not improving, but just maintaining them and keeping them active for everyone who uses them. And the costs come in two forms. It would come as a labor cost, so our building maintenance group and their staff that have to spend time in these buildings fixing them, in addition to finding replacement parts for old systems that are in both buildings. That would obviously be greatly reduced due to the fact that we have a new building with new modern systems that are obviously much more reliable and with a longevity, in excess of 10 years at least before they have to be repaired. So that's one consideration. The second is utility costs. The current buildings total 182,000 square feet. The building, as you heard tonight, is 162,000 square feet, about 10% smaller. Due to that, the savings that we're anticipating with the modern systems that we have is about 20% less utilities. The new building will not have fossil fuels in it, so as a net zero building, the consideration really is solely electric. And we feel like we can do that within 20% less in our budget. That does not include the PV, the solar arrays that would be on the building and potentially as a solar canopy in the parking areas. But having said that, if we were able to get that included within the project, we're looking at a potential for 50% less on the utilities. So very significant benefits, and obviously in a much better building. The final piece would be staffing. When we talk about staffing, I think the superintendent talked about how programming would change. Obviously, we have a lot more availability of certain curriculum and programming in the building. So we talked about this recently, and we think that we would like to work within the current staffing, so people may be reassigned into different areas related to what they teach now, but with a new building, with all this technology, they'd have this opportunity to do these amazing curriculums, and they would be kept on staff, but maybe in a different capacity. So staffing we don't see on a teaching level necessarily reducing. We do see some potential there for administrative and support staff reductions, just from combining the two buildings, less maybe one head custodian versus two, obviously one principal versus two, those kinds of efficiencies we do see.
Now, another question I heard was the busing, because the schools are being at the same time. How does that impact the cost?
I don't think that it would impact the busing costs at all. It would be running the same number of buses. Obviously, they'd be running at the same time like they are now. The mileage would be negligible as far as, and that's how we pay for our bus contract, right? How many miles are being driven over a day, over a month, over a year, obviously. So I don't see that changing significantly at all.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again.
This is more just a comment. Before I begin with my comments, I live on Washington Street, a few houses down the road from this school. With respect to the existing Burden Johnson buildings, the old saying, shoulda, coulda, woulda, doesn't do anyone any good. It's time to move forward and learn from the past. Towns evolve, and it's not a bad thing. It's time to do what's best for our community. Now, it's us, the community of Walpole, who need to own the commitment of education. That means voting yes in building a new school. Our children, and children for years to come, should not pay the price for the buildings with failing systems. The town has outgrown the current schools. The buildings don't have adequate space to meet modern educational needs. The classrooms, technology spaces, science labs, special education spaces no longer are adequate for the town's needs and don't meet MSBA guidelines. This is the fiscally responsible way to get this project done. There is a clear need. We have MSBA funding, which we got through a very competitive process. There's no guarantee we will get this funding again. To reiterate, the town of Lincoln voted down their opportunity and then went back to MSBA 3 times and have been rejected every time. They are now paying 4.5 times more themselves. Now is the time to do this and take advantage of the funding. Bottom line, the buildings are ancient and don't meet modern educational needs. Please vote yes.
Just 2 questions. The first one is the amount you said that the state currently covers, it's $368 or whatever the amount is.
Their construction cost?
Right.
$360.
So if during the process they raise or lower that amount, will our impact, or we're locked in?
We're locked in based on, they time it based on when we execute the scope and budget agreement, which is currently the agreement up for execution. For instance, there are schools that sign that just before June when they raise it, and they're locked in at the 330.
Okay.
So the way the MSBA works is you're locked in at the time of your decision to what their policies are at that time.
Okay. Then I'm just curious, how many parking spaces will there be?
Yeah.
220, 225, something like that.
220. And the reason I'm asking is it's the auditorium.
Yep.
We talked about 600 seats, a very modern auditorium. I'm just wondering, one, is there going to be enough parking where it can be used for an event outside of school? And the other question I had was, it's the size of the seats. In the auditorium, are the seats going to fit a 6th and 7th grader, or are they going to fit adults? I'm just looking out for all our interests. That was my question. Thanks.
Yeah, you want to get this plan out? So I'll take a shot, and Chris Blesson from TAP A is here and can talk to more of that. I'll give you my experience. I mean, he'll give you a more technical answer, but the auditorium seating, the seat size actually are a range of seats, and they typically do that so they can maximize the amount of seating. They're not all little kid-sized seats, but they do range between, a typical size seat and a larger seat. And the rows will have different size seats in them. That way they get the quantity of seats that you're looking for. Imagine if you did all extra large seats, you'd have less
So there'll be
seats.
different size seats.
Different size seats. Yeah. I mean,
We'll have to get there early.
well, they're within, within a couple inches.
First, I just wanted to thank you all for the, this is a crazy amount of work and thought that went into this project, and it seems to me to be very well thought out, so I appreciate that. I've been following this. I've heard a lot about the State of Bird Middle School, but tonight was the first time I actually got to see it with my own eyes, and even though I was prepared for it, it was still really, really surprising to me. The need is very, very clear. And my question is, I know years ago the high school was in danger of losing its accreditation, and we had to do some work on the high school. Are we at risk of the same thing here if we don't do something soon?
Are you talking about middle school?
Yeah, the middle school,
Yeah,
sorry.
Well, just to be clear, the high school was not at risk of losing accreditation. I think that's a rumor, so we'll
okay.
clarify that now. Let's start with that. And then that was NEASC, I think, is the accreditation body you're speaking of for the high school, and there is not an accreditation body that's for the middle school. So
Okay.
that wouldn't
That's just
apply
okay.
technically,
All right,
yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
Could I just add something to the discussion? She mentioned the high school. As I recall, and I moved into this town in 1995, and almost immediately began the battle of trying to do something about the high school, which, as I recall, was in danger of losing its accreditation back then because of the state of the high school. After decades of battle, we did get a renovation and addition for the high school. It wasn't easy, but we managed to do that. I wanted to just give feedback to the woman who I believe has already left, but sorry, I'm losing my voice. She talked about scare tactics. You can view the comments about what would happen if this does not pass as scare tactics, or you could view it as information that you need to have. More than a decade ago, I can't now remember, I've been on the Finance Committee for 12 years, so it was before that. We had an operational override. We had a need for staffing, and it was desperate. And the public was told if it did not pass, teachers would lose their jobs, they would be laid off. And a number of people in the community spread the rumor that that wasn't true, it was scare tactics, it was never going to happen, the committee was just making it up to frighten people. The override did not pass. Pink slips were handed out. Teachers lost their jobs. There was another vote in the fall, and the override passed. However, those good teachers were gone. When we were able then to hire, we hired people who, at that point, were still looking for work. So they perhaps were not the most stellar candidates. You can use your own imagination. But the point I'm making with this story is that it's not a story, it's a fact. Don't believe the people who tell you they're trying to frighten us. You need to have this information. You don't want to be in a situation where this project does not go forward, and then we're left with a situation where we're paying the entire bill, and you'll have people saying, I didn't know, I didn't realize. Why didn't they tell us? We're telling you. So pass the word. This is kind of a now or never kind of a thing. These schools will have to be fixed. But the question is, are we going to get the state to pay with us for some good portion of this, or are we going to pay for it ourselves? You don't have to be a math whiz to understand that there's a significant difference in which way we go. And one other thing, there are people who are concerned about a large school, combining the two schools. I'm on the school building committee as the finance committee representative. I was really surprised when we had a slide at one of our meetings that showed Walpole is an outlier. Most communities our size have one middle school, not two. There are some towns that have two middle schools, but is a distinct minority. So this is really the way it's done. And as others have discussed, it is a very effective and efficient way to deliver education to our middle schoolers. So again, I appreciate all of you who've come out to get the facts and information, because it's a big decision. But you want to, when you go into the ballot, fill out that ballot, you want to know that you're doing it with all the information that's out there, and you can make an educated decision. So thanks for coming.
Mark, I think if it's okay with you, we'll stay up here for for individual questions if people want to ask us.
That's what I was just going to say. If anybody else has any questions, or if anybody had any questions but didn't feel like taking the microphone, we'll still be down here in front to be able to take your questions one-on-one. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night.